Hello, good evening everyone. Welcome to Unacademy, India's largest e-learning platform, where you will get option to choose subscription as per your convenience. And you will get daily live classes, recorded lectures, structured courses. Along with your preparation, you can evaluate yourself through our mock tests. So download Unacademy app and start your preparation. Hello everyone, my name is Rishikesh and I'm having experience more than 8 years to guide aspirants for the civil services examination. On our platform of Unacademy, we have 100 plus top educators who will guide you throughout your preparation. You can opt courses as per your convenience. If you want to start your preparation with modules or subject wise, you have that option. If you want to start with complete GS part, you can opt for that as well. So UPSC CSE preparation, you can start with our Unacademy platform with plus subscription, and do not forget to use code RBI Live to get 10% discount. Plus, those candidates want to appear for the prelims in 2022, they can opt for our iconic subscription where personal coach and study planning facilities available with this course. So you can opt for this course with 10% discount by using code RBI Live. So there are a number of students asking about optional subjects. So we have various optional subjects. So you can choose anyone according to any subjects or any optional as per your choice. And again, you can use the RBI Live code for that to get 10% discount. And Unacademy launched one Unacademy Combat contest scheduled on 31st January 2021, Sunday. And time for that is 11 a.m. So please join this Unacademy Combat. So this contains format like this. You will get prizes and ranking. Plus, from 25th January, we are going to start new batches for UPSC CSE 2021, 2022, and 2023. So, as per your convenience, you can join the batches for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, along with NCRT batches for UPSC. Right. And last but not least, those aspirants who want to upgrade their subscription into Iconic, so they can opt this offer or minimum prices fees before 25th Jan. After that, Iconic prices will be high. All right. So, as in the last lecture, we have started historical background of our constitution. So we have studied part 1 under the heading of the company rule from 1773 to 1858. In today's lecture, we'll study next part, that is part 2, under the crown rule of 1858 to 1947. If we'll start today's lecture with this part 2, I would like to give you a fair idea about the structure of this course, like we will finish or will study few acts. Uh, so the Government of India Act 1858, the Indian Councils Act of 1861, 1892, 1909, the Government of India Act of 1919, the Government of India Act 1935, and the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Now, what happened? Why Britishers failed to change the administration and came with this ground rule? Because the event happened in 1857, that revolt, or we can say War of Independence or Sepoy Mutiny, had revealed East India Company's limitations in the administration. So British Parliament decided to transfer the power from East India Company to the Crown rule. And during this period, they have passed various acts, right? So if majorly we'll divide these acts into two parts, right? So it's Government of India Act, and another one is Indian Council Act. Further, if we'll divide these acts, then Government of India Act 1858, Government of India Act 1919, Government of India Act 1935, and if we'll divide, or we can describe, Indian Council Act of 1861, 1892, and 1909. All right. So we'll study accordingly and we'll learn features of these acts, how those acts impacted on day-to-day administration of British era. So first we'll start with the Government of India Act 1858. Right. So the act known as the Act of Good Government of India, because it's abolished East India Company and transferred power to Crown. Right. So in under this act, transfer of power was ruled. Right. Now, in the East India Company regime, Governor General of India designation was replaced with Viceroy of India. And this Viceroy was the direct representative of British Crown in India. Lord Canning became the first Viceroy of India. So remember these points, guys. So this act known as the Act of Good Government of India, because transfer of powers from East India Company to the Crown of England, that's Britain, right? Under this act, the system of double government, as we have discussed double government concept in the last lecture, so Board of Control and Court of Directors were abolished. All right, so double government system was abolished and replaced with the Office of Secretary of the State and Council of India. Right. So the Secretary of State was a member of British Cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. Right. So autonomy of East India Company and power of East India Company transferred to the Crown directly, means to the British Parliament. So the Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet. Now, the created new Council of India, the structure was 15 members, advisory body. Remember the point here is advisory body. So these members can give advice to government or I mean to say British administration regarding all administrative reforms and day-to-day ruling, right? Then this act was largely confined to the improvement of the administrative machinery by which the Indian government was to supervise and controlled in England, right? So the act was deal with these features. Now, next act passed by the British Parliament, that is the Indian Councils Act of 1861, right? So what happened after the revolt of 1857? British Parliament decided, or they observed there flaws in the administration of East India Company. So they took decision and took appropriate steps to transfer of power. Plus, they have decided to rule the country along with the cooperation of native people, means Indians. So, seeking the cooperation of the Indians in the administration is the key point of Indian Council Act of 1861, right? Now we can say this act is an important landmark in the constitutional and political history of India. Remember, guys, this is an important landmark, constitutional and political history of India. Now, what happened? The features of this act, it made a beginning of the representative institutions by associating Indians with the lawmaking process. That's why is an important landmark. And Viceroy, under this act, the Viceroy should nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. In 1862, the Viceroy nominated 3 Indians to his legislative council. In 1862, the Viceroy was nominated, or the Viceroy nominated 3 Indians, in which the Raja of Banaras, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao was in that legislative council. All right. This is the part of the Indian Council Act of 1861, means participation of Indians into the administration. Now, this act initiated the process of decentralization. Just remember the process, guys, because as we have studied in the last lecture, centralization process from 1773. In various acts, they passed with the features of centralization process. But in this act, they initiated the process of decentralization, means restoring the legislative powers to the presidencies like Bombay and Madras. All right. Now, the policy of legislative devolution resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. So, this is the feature of decentralization and the policy of legislative devolution, right? Now, this act also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, northwestern provinces, and Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1886, and 1897 respectively. So this act was featured with establishment of new legislative councils, right? Again, if we'll see next feature of this act, so this act empowered the viceroy to make new rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the council and governance. All right. Now, if we'll see next act, that is the Indian Councils Act of 1892. In this act, British Parliament increased the number of additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative councils. As I told you, after 1857, they came with an idea of participation of Indian citizens into administration. So, step by step, they took decisions, and under the Act of 1892, they increased the number of additional non-official members into legislative councils. But they maintained the official majority with them only, right? Means with Britishers. Now, this Act of 1892 increased the functions of legislative councils and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. Before 1892, representative and Indian citizens were asked, limited rights with them, and under this act, now they reformed the particular rights and they just provided few extra functions, means increase the functions of legislative council and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing question to the executive. All right. Now, the act made a limited and indirect provision for the use of election in filling up some of the non-official seats. If we are talking about non-official seats, means they use the process of nomination instead of election. All right. So under the heading of nomination, they started selection of or entry of Indian citizens into the administration, right? So next important act is the Indian Councils Act of 1909. Means this act is known as Morley-Minto reforms. All right. Lord Morley was the Secretary of State of India and Lord Minto was the Viceroy of India. So this act known as Morley-Minto reforms. In this act, there are few features we will study, like this act considerably increased the size of legislative councils. All right. So size of legislative council increased, both central and provincial areas, right? So, and if I'm talking about number of central legislative council was raised from 16 to 60. But again, here is the catch. Out of 60, 40 members from Britain, that is Britishers, and 20 were Indians. All right. So British Parliament and the rurals decided to keep majority with them only, right? And this act retained official majority in the central legislative council, but they allowed the provincial legislative councils to have non-official majority. Means if I'm talking about central legislative council, majority of Britishers, and In the Provisional Council, non-official majority means Indians. All right. Okay, we'll move forward. In this act of 1909, it provided for the first time the association of Indians with executive councils of the viceroy and governors. All right. Means Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join Viceroy's Executive Council. This has happened in a first time. I mean to say, this is the first step regarding to Executive Council and entry of Indians into the Executive Council. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join Viceroy's Executive Council as the law member. Alright, guys. Now, this act introduced a system of communal representation. Now, next feature of this act was it introduced a system of communal representation for Muslims by accepting the concept of separate electorate. All right, and under this the Muslim members were to be elected only by Muslim voters. Thus, the act legalized communalism, we can say, and Lord Minto came to be known as the father of communal electorate. All right. And this act also provided for the separate representation of presidency corporations, chamber of commerce, and universities and zamindars. All right. So separate representation of this class. Now, after that, British Parliament passed the Government of India Act 1919. In this act, so what we can say, under this act in August 1917, British government for the first time declared that its objective was to gradually introduce responsible government in India. So we can say a step towards independence, but an integral part of the British Empire. They have passed this act and featured with responsible government in India means transfer of power, but as an integral part of the British Empire. All right. Now, the Government of India Act 1919 came into force in 1921. All right. Now, this act known as Montesquieu-Chelmsford reforms means Montesquieu was the Secretary of State for India and Lord Chelmsford was the Viceroy of India. So this act relaxed the central control over the provinces, means supports autonomy by separating the central and provincial subjects. So the subjects like central and for provincial. All right. And the central and provincial legislatures were authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. All right. So, but in this case and under this law, the structure of government, the structure of government continued to be centralized and centralized and unitary. All right. So the Government of India Act of 1919 passed with the features like introduction of responsible government in India. Then they relaxed the central control and provided powers, or we can say authorization to make laws to provincial legislatures. Right now, this act, Government of India Act 1919, further divided the provincial subjects into two parts. One is transferred and second one is reserved. Okay, the transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of ministers responsible to the legislative council. All right, and the reserved subjects were to be administered by the governor and his executive council without being responsible to the legislative council. So this is the differentiate or difference between transferred and reserved subjects, right? And this act provided for establishment of a public service commission. The important point to be noted here, guys. So the act provided, or the establishment of a public service commission. Hence, Central Public Service Commission was set up in the 1926 for recruiting civil servants. All right, now, so these are the key features, along with the principle of communal representation was extended with separate electorate for Sikhs, Christians, Anglo-Indians, Europeans, besides Muslims. All right. So extension of communal representation mentioned in this act, especially for the minorities. Now, this act introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct elections in the country. See, bicameralism and direct elections in the country, and the Indian Legislative Council was replaced by the bicameral Legislative Council, right? Means upper house, that is Council of State, and lower house, that is Legislative Assembly. So this is the bicameral system. I mean to say bi, which means bicameral legislature consisting upper house and lower house. Upper house means Council of State, and lower house means Legislative Assembly. Now, in these houses, the majority of members selected or appointed by direct elections. All right. So the process of selection or process of choosing these members through direct election. Now, this act required that now in the Viceroy's Executive Council, out of 6 members, 3 members were Indians, right? So these 3 members were to be Indian. So this is the one of the important feature of this act where the body of 6 members, in which 3 members from India, 3 members were from India, except the commander in chief. All right. Plus, the act separated first time, and this act separated for the first time the provincial and central budgets. And with this, provincial legislatures being authorized to make their budgets according to their requirement. Okay. Now, this act granted franchise to a limited number of people on the basis of property, tax, or education. So, restricted to this class only, that is limited number of people. It's this act granted franchise. All right. Now, this act, now implementation of this act, right? So implementation of this act from 1919 to 1929, that is the span of 10 years. When British Parliament passed this act, they just decided for the appointment of a statutory commission to review the implementation of this act. Okay. Now, so in in November 1927, means 2 years before schedule, British government announced the appointment of Indian Statutory Commission known as Simon Commission. The 7 members Statutory Commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon. Now, in this commission, all the members were British. That's why all the parties from India boycotted the commission, as we know the famous slogan, that is Simon Go Back. So all Indians boycotted the commission, right? So throughout the country, agitation and uh, everybody was repelled and boycotted this commission. But this commission submitted its report in 1930, right? So according to this commission, they recommended diarchy be abolished, abolition of diarchy, and responsible government be extended in the provinces. Plus, Federation of British India and the princely states be established. Okay, so Simon Commission recommended a Federation of British India and the princely states be established. Recommendation of this commission was communal electorates be continued. So as we know, the policy of Britishers, or policy was divide and rule. Okay, so according to that, they divided Indian society on the basis of communal electorate, right? So after that, 3 roundtable conferences were called by the British government to consider the proposals, and subsequently a white paper on constitutional reforms was published by the British government. in March 1933, containing provisions for federal setup and provincial autonomy. Provincial autonomy, okay. So, a federal setup and provincial autonomy. Then, a joint committee of the houses of the British Parliament was set up under Lord Linlithgow to further consider the scheme, right? And the report submitted in 1934 said that a federation would be set up if at least 50% of the princely states were ready to join it. Princely state, princely states were ready to join it. And the bill prepared on the basis of this report was passed by the British Parliament to become the Government of India Act 1935. All right. So, on the basis of this report, on the basis of recommendations, the report was passed. And the Government of India Act of 1935. During that, August 1932, before that, in the August 1932, the British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald announced a scheme of representation of the minorities which came to be known as the Communal Award. Means the award not only continued separate electorates for the Muslims, Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians and Europeans, but also extended it to the depressed classes, that is scheduled castes. Now, after this move, Mahatma Gandhi was distressed over this extension of principle of communal representation to the depressed classes and undertook fast unto death in Yeravdachal, Pune to get the award modified. For the modification of communal award, Mahatma Gandhi undertook fast unto death, right? So at the end, there was an agreement between the leaders of Congress and depressed classes, majorly Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, right? And the agreement known as Pune Pact in the history, Pact retained the Hindu joint electorate and gave reserved seat to the deprived classes. So this award modified after Pune Pact and changed like and retained the Hindu joint electorate and gave reserved seats to the depressed classes. Now, after that, implementation of and the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act 1935. All right, in which we can say this is the second milestone towards completely responsible government. In earlier acts, we have studied first milestone. Now, the Government of India Act 1935, known as second milestone towards responsible government. The act provided establishment of an all India federation All India Federation consisting of provinces and princely states as units. So, establishment of All India Federation. Now, the act divided the powers between the center and the units, means provinces and princely states. So, there are three lists like federal list for center with 59 subjects. Second is provincial list with 54 subjects, and concurrent list for both with 36 subjects, right? So, which means, or we can say, the footprint of current law of state list, concurrent list, and this list footprints observed in the Act of 1935. All right. Now, the Act featured with residuary powers were given to the Viceroy. So we can say the residuary powers were given to the Viceroy, empowerment of Viceroy. And the Federation never came into being as princely states did not join it. Now, as per the Act, they plan to establish All India Federation, but this federation was, or this federation never came into exist due to princely states denied to join. All right. Now, this act next feature or next point in this act was diarchy abolishment, right, in the provinces, and introduce provincial autonomy in its place. Means this act abolished diarchy, replaced with provincial autonomy. So this feature mentioned in the Government of India Act 1935. Right. Now, next feature of this act was the federal legislature was to have two chambers, that is bicameral, Council of States and the Federal Legislative Assembly. And the Council of State, that is upper house, was to be a permanent body. All right. So the Council of State was to be a permanent body, right? Now, this act introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. Yes, act introduced this bicameralism in 6 out of total 11 provinces, in which in the 6 provinces they introduce bicameralism, right? So now these 6 legislatures were Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam, and the union provinces were made this bicameral, consisting of upper house and lower house, means a legislative council and legislative assembly. So legislative council means upper house and legislative Assembly means lower house. But after the announcement of this feature, many restrictions were placed on them. No doubt, British Parliament introduced this bicameralism, means Legislative Council and Legislative Assembly with restrictions or limited of powers, right? Now, in the same act, it further extended principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for depressed classes, scheduled caste, women and labor workers was it mentioned in this act but affected with or modified with Pune Pact, right? Now, the next important feature of this act is establishment of Reserve Bank of India to control currency and credit of the company. So, Reserve Bank of India, establishment of Reserve Bank of India is the important feature of this act. Along with that, is so in this act, a provincial public service commission and joint public service commission was introduced, right? So along with federal public service commission, they introduced provincial public service commission and joint public service commission. So joint public service commission for two or more provinces, or provincial public service commission for particular provinces. So this is the important feature. Now, one of the important feature on the perspective of judiciary, the establishment of a federal code which was set up in 1937, right? So one of the important feature of this act was establishment of federal code. So just remember this establishment like Reserve Bank of India, Reserve Bank of India, Provincial Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission, and Federal Code. All right. Now, we'll see next important act, the Indian Independence Act of 1947. All right. So, in the February 1947, the British Prime Minister Clement Attlee declared that the British rule in India would end by June 30, 1948. So 30th June 1948. After which the power would be transferred to responsible Indian hands. Means during 1857 or after 1857, East India Company abolished and transferred power to the Crown, means British Parliament, and British Prime Minister declared in February 1947 for the power of Crown transferred to India. All right. So they announced this featured in the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Now, this announcement was followed by the agitation by the Muslim League demanding partition of the country. In the February 1947, British Prime Minister announced that they will hand over or transfer power to the responsible Indian states. But at that time, that particular announcement was followed by the agitation by the Muslim League demanding the partition of the country, partition of India. So in June 1947, the British government made it clear that any constitution framed by the Constituent Assembly of India formed in 1946 cannot apply to those parts of the country which were unwilling to accept it. Okay, after that agitation, they announced that any constitution framed by the Constituent Assembly of India, means the Constituent Assembly formed in the 1946, cannot apply to those parts of the country which were unwilling or denied to accept, right? Or denied to join, right? Yes. So on the same day, Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, put forth the partition plan. During that period, Lord Mountbatten produced one or presented the partition plan of India known as Mountbatten Plan. Now, the British Parliament passed the Indian Independence Act 1947 based on this Mountbatten Plan. And this plan ended the British rule in India. Now, the Indian Independence Act of 1947 provided for the creation of two independent dominions of India and Pakistan with effect from 15 August 1947. Right? So each dominion was to have a governor general to be responsible for the